The house on Poole Street was eerily quiet. Inside, the walls normally held the laughter of 3 young children, but this was now replaced with silence. When officers arrived just after 11 p.m, they found a man sitting in the middle of the road. His long hair was loose, his face was slack with confusion, and as police ordered him to the ground, he simply said,
"I'm surrendering."
Inside the house, the scene that waited for officers was almost too much to process. Even hardened police investigators recoiled at the sight. The man, then taken into questioning by police, whispered 5 words in disbelief.
"This is real, isn't it?"
By the way, this is Dark Case, and you can call me Jack. I bring you true crime documentaries and other things that you may later regret knowing. Please do join the amazingly supportive Dark Case family by hitting subscribe now, and make sure that you have all notifications turned on. And now it's time for today's little question. What would your dream sandwich have on it? Go wild in the comments. I want to see the weirdest combinations, but it's still got to be tasty. All Patreon or channel membership support does go a really long way, and I can't thank you all enough. But now, on with the video. Synamin Bell grew up in a big, lively family. She was in fact one of 9 siblings. Her brother Luke remembered her as a kid who was always smiling. Every childhood photo, every early memory, pure light. As an adult, that spark never faded either. Even when life threw obstacle after obstacle in her path, Synamin fought for a better future. She wasn't just working to survive, she had dreams. She was raising 3 young children, and she was doing it almost single-handedly. Synamin had big plans too. She wanted to study medicine and to specialize in healthcare, and to help her immunocompromised daughter to live a full life. Limited resources never stopped her. Support wasn't always easy to find, but Synamin still made sure that her kids felt loved, safe, and hopeful about their future too. Friends described her as loyal, generous, and stubbornly optimistic, the kind of person who would give away her final dollar if someone else needed it more. But she didn't just want to survive any longer, she wanted to thrive for her children. And on her final night, she was already enrolled in a medical course, and she was just days away from starting. But all of that promise, all of that fight for more, would be put to an end before she could truly flourish. Cody James Edwards didn't have that same kind of glow around him. His past was marked by instability, by substance use, and a growing sense of paranoia. By the time he met Synamin Bell, Cody was already a heavy user of hallucinogens. He had a particular history with a substance called DOI, a substance which is often missold as that classic substance that hippies used to trip on in the 60s, and well, they probably do today as well. But this wasn't the kind of thing that made you giggly or mellow. Instead, it was notorious for triggering paranoia or even full-blown psychotic episodes. And Cody knew this. He'd used it before and he'd felt this before. But even knowing the risks, he continued using. When he and Synamin first got together, friends say that there was a hopeful period. It was brief, but it was real. Both of them were trying to move forward in their life. Both had baggage and both wanted better. But cracks started to show early on. There were arguments, there was growing tension, and there was substance use that only deepened Cody's volatility. The happy home that Synamin wanted to build was crumbling from the inside. And nobody, not even she herself, could have predicted just how it would all collapse. At first glance, Synamin and Cody might have seemed like an ordinary couple. Just 2 young people trying to rebuild. Behind closed doors, however, the cracks had started to form almost immediately. Friends later said that there were arguments, and sometimes these were even loud enough for neighbours to overhear. But it was nothing too extreme at first, nothing that immediately screamed danger. But those closest to Synamin noticed that she was withdrawing. There started to be missed phone calls. There were plans being cancelled at the last minute. There were moments where her bright spirit seemed dulled, as if she were carrying something too heavy to name. There were also concerns about Cody's substance use, and his reliance on hallucinogens, especially DOI, was now spiralling. The Cody that Synamin fell for wasn't always the man standing in front of her, not anymore. But still, she stayed. Maybe she hoped that he would change. Maybe she believed that love could still fix this situation. Or maybe she understood how quickly substance-fueled paranoia could turn into something catastrophic. March the 12th, 2022 started like any other night, but it would end with heartbreak so profound it would shatter an entire community. Synamin and Cody had both taken DOI that evening, and at some point Cody slipped into what experts would later describe as a full-blown paranoia psychosis. In his mind, Synamin wasn't his partner anymore. Instead, she was an imagined threat. She was someone that he believed wanted to hurt him. And inside her modest Poole Street home, what began as an argument quickly spiraled out of control. Cody grabbed a metal dumbbell bar and he struck Synamin, not once, but over and over. The left side of her head was crushed under the force. She fell to the bedroom floor, likely unconscious. But it didn't stop there. Cody continued the beating. Synamin's time on this earth came to an end. But even though she was no longer breathing, Cody got a sharp implement and used it 5 times on Synamin's back. And then there was silence. Cody stumbled outside, disorientated. Neighbours would later recall a strange sight, a young man wandering aimlessly in the street, as if he was waking from a nightmare that he couldn't escape, and his behaviour was bizarre enough for onlookers to call the police. The officers who responded to Poole Street that night were wearing body cams. The footage shows them pulling up outside Synamin's house. They spot Cody first, sitting on the ground, blank-faced, with red on his clothes. Get on the floor, get on the ground. The officers' voices are sharp, cutting through the eerie silence. Cody doesn't run though, he doesn't argue. He lies down slowly and says, almost dreamlike,
"I'm surrendering."
Inside the house, officers move quickly, and then they stop. One officer can be heard swearing under his breath. The scene they found was worse than anything they had been prepared for. Meanwhile, Cody was loaded into the back of a police van and was taken to the Mount Gambier police station. There, a video-recorded interview captured what little coherence he had left. He sat slumped at a table, face pale, eyes glazed. When officers asked what he had taken, Cody mumbled, LSD. As the questions continued, the weight of what he'd done seemed to finally crash down on him. He buried his head in his arms. He banged his forehead against the table, groaning.
This is real, isn't it?
At that moment, any lingering haze of the substance-induced psychosis must have lifted, and now only the grim reality remained. Word of Synamin's end spread fast through Millicent, a tight-knit town where everyone knew everyone. This meant that the shock ran deep. Police cordoned off Poole Street for days, combing through the home for evidence. Major crime detectives and forensics teams were flown in from Adelaide.
Honestly, I'm just disgusted and heartbroken because I knew like both of them, her children came first no matter what, and she loved them like no tomorrow.
Friends say he'd moved in with Synamin about a month ago. The house is now a murder scene.
Neighbours to the house were horrified. Many had seen Synamin just hours before her end, sitting on her front steps, chatting with a friend and laughing. But by morning, her home was a crime scene. Superintendent Campbell Hill described the community's reaction as shock and grief on a devastating scale. Millicent wasn't a place where things like this happened, and certainly not to someone like Synamin, a young mum just trying to build a better life. Her 3 children, aged 6, 4 and 3, had been staying with their grandmother on that night, and they were still small enough to believe that they were simply on a fun sleepover, and for a little while longer they could be shielded from the truth. But the damage had been done, and the ripples were only just beginning. When Cody Edwards first faced court, he pleaded not guilty to murder. The trial began in the Supreme Court, sitting in Mount Gambier, with a judge, not a jury, presiding. From the beginning, his defense team made their strategy clear. They argued that Cody had experienced a substance-fueled psychotic break, that he genuinely believed that Synamin was trying to harm him, and that, in that moment, he acted out of self-defense. The Crown, however, pushed back hard. They pointed to the sheer brutality of the attack. After all, there were over 50 injuries. There was blunt force trauma so severe it crushed the back of the skull, as well as the usage of the sharp implement after Synamin had already stopped moving. The Crown argued that this wasn't reasonable, proportional, or remotely excusable. Midway through the trial, Cody was rearraigned. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and the prosecution accepted the plea. The courtroom reaction was immediate. Members of Synamin's family, who had sat through every graphic detail of the case, walked out. Some left in tears, others shook their heads in disbelief. Outside the courthouse, her sister, Synamin Bell, called the plea deal a betrayal. It was all about him, she said bitterly. What about what she went through? Inside, the trial pivoted into sentencing submissions, and the outrage only grew louder. Victim impact statements were read aloud in court, and each word was sharp, raw, and impossible to ignore. Synamin's mother, Rosemary, spoke about the unimaginable task of caring for 3 grieving young kids. And I'll warn you, this really is heartbreaking. Children who still said, "I love you, mummy," every day, not fully understanding that their mother was never coming back. Her son, now 8, sometimes woke up sobbing because he couldn't remember the sound of his mother's voice. Her daughter, 6, refused to look in the mirror because the reflection reminded her too much of Synamin. The youngest, just 4, talked to her mother's photo after school every single day. They received a life sentence of loss and grief, Rosemary said, while the man who did this will walk free in a few years. How does that make sense? Synamin's sister Brenda also wrote to the court. She reminded Judge Kimber that this was not just a tragic accident or an unfortunate misunderstanding. Instead, it was a brutal event that left lifelong effects on many people. The courtroom was heavy with emotion. Even seasoned court staff struggled to keep composure. Cody sat through it all, silent. At one point, though, he read an apology letter out loud. He said that he would be haunted by what he'd done. But by then, most of Synamin's family had already walked out, unwilling to hear another word. When sentencing day arrived, emotions were raw. Justice Adam Kimber described Cody's attack on Synamin as brutal and devastating. He said that Cody's voluntary use of DOI, knowing its effects on him, made his moral culpability even higher. However, because of the accepted manslaughter plea, Cody's sentence now had limits that the court couldn't change. He was sentenced to just 11 years in prison, and he had a non-parole period of 8 years and 10 months. His time was backdated to his arrest on March 12, 2022, meaning that Cody could be eligible for release as early as January 2031. As the sentence was read out, supporters of Synamin's family stood up and stormed out of the court once more. Some shouted at Cody as he was led away. Outside, Synamin's sister, Shenta, called it a spit in her face. They made it all about him, she said. What about her? What about her kids? But something did change. Public outrage led by Synamin's family and friends sparked political action. South Australia's Attorney General, Kyan Mayer, announced that the government would introduce new laws that would prevent people from using substance-induced psychosis as a way to lessen their responsibility for their crimes. The laws as they currently stand do not meet community expectations, he said. Drafting of the law began almost immediately, and the movement that Synamin's family started may one day save others from facing the same injustice. Let me know your thoughts about this